Hello and welcome to Voice of the Voiceless, Speak Your Truth. Today I'm going to be talking to Lael Stone. Last week I released a podcast of our conversation with Lael about aware parenting. So if you're interested in learning anything about aware parenting or are interested in what it is, feel free to take a look at that. So in this podcast, which we recorded on the same day, we talk about sex education for children. So a little bit about Lael is that she's been working for the last 14 years in childbirth education and postnatal care. And she's been working with couples through pregnancy, birth and the first few years of life. So she's the creator and director of About Birth online education program. She's also a certified aware parenting instructor. And she's been teaching sex education to high school students for the last 5 years. So in this podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit about why educating our children on sex is so important, and age-appropriate ways to approach the subject with them, and how we can overcome some barriers to this, like shame and embarrassment, so that we can have these conversations openly with our children. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation, listening to this, and if you have any feedback, feel free to make a comment on this podcast. I would love hearing from you. Hi Lael, welcome to Voice of the Voiceless, Speak Your Truth. Thank you for being a guest with me today.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
So why is sex education for kids so important?
Oh, look, there are quite a few reasons why I believe it's really important. I mean, firstly, I think one of the biggest ones that I work with is that we want children to grow up with a good foundation in sex and sexuality. And by that I mean having like a pleasure-based foundation, which helps them understand that their birthright is to enjoy sex, to feel good. It's an amazing thing. A lot of people in our culture have a lot of shame around sex. We have a lot of issues around it, and sexuality is just another part of being human. So for me, firstly, one of the important things around why sex education is important is to set up a good foundation for children to help them understand how their bodies work and so that they can become healthy teens sexually. So that's one of the first reasons. One of the other reasons is for safety, which is that we need to teach children from a young age about their bodies, their body parts, what is okay to touch, what is not, teaching them about consent, all those kind of things, so that they aren't in situations where they potentially could come into danger. So, 1 in 3 children are looking at that they might have some form of sexual abuse happen or inappropriate touching. And I think when we can empower kids with the right words, without using fear, but just teaching them about consent and teaching them about their bodies, then that can work towards helping them be safer in the world. So that's the second reason. And the third is just giving them information so that they can be empowered, because having a growing body, going through puberty, lots of stuff happens, and when we don't educate our kids about that, then they often will look somewhere to find education. And these days, thanks to the internet, we have porn. And so therefore, children will often gather a whole lot of information that's not true and correct. And that's, again, what sets up a foundation for them sexually. So knowledge is empowering, through any part of life, and particularly with sex education, I think. I feel like sex education for children, it's just as important as teaching them about nutrition and teaching them about exercising. It's another fundamental part of their bodies. And with that, we're talking about age-appropriate sex education. So we're not necessarily teaching 4-year-olds about intercourse and those kind of things. We're teaching age-appropriate education over the years so that it becomes a normal conversation to have with our children, again, so there isn't all that shame and uncomfortableness that goes with it.
When does sex education need to start and why?
Yeah, so for me, I think it starts, when they're really little. So I often talk about that when you have a baby and you are massaging your baby's body and touching and kissing, what we're doing at that point is setting up healthy imprints around physical touch and what feels good and pleasure. So even though we don't call that sex education, just the way we touch and interact with our babies is basically setting up a form of imprint for that child around what is good touch and what is bad touch. So from the beginning, I'm very big on connection and loving and touching and kissing, our little ones to feel really good, obviously appropriately. But then I find that once our little ones, start talking and start moving, it's about talking about body parts, so naming body parts appropriately. So it can be good to have nicknames, but it's really important for children to know that their vulva is a vulva and that there is a penis. We don't call our elbow our outer arm, like sometimes people call their bits down there or those kind of things. So it's giving them the appropriate language for what their body parts are, again, normalising them, not making them anything different. And then it's starting at that young age, just introducing things around appropriate touching private parts and public parts and things like consent. So what we often talk about with that is not necessarily making children kiss or hug someone if they don't want to. It's a big thing we do in our society. Give Auntie Jackie a kiss. But if a 4-year-old's got a weird vibe on Auntie Jackie, and we're making that child kiss them, then what we're teaching them is about when we tell you to do something with your body, you must do that, as opposed to the child having great bodily autonomy to say, no, I don't want to do that. So being mindful of those kind of things as well. You can wave at Auntie Jackie, you can give her a high five, you can just acknowledge and say thank you. You don't have to kiss or hug her if you don't want. So there's some other things of, we can start doing when they're little. And then as they, I find that around about the age of 4 or 5, children start taking notice of pregnant bellies or, if mum's having another baby, those kind of things. And they're great learning opportunities to talk about pregnancy and talking about childbirth and those kind of things, again, in age-appropriate ways to make it normal, and I think the big thing is normalising what sex education is. It's not one talk, it's many, 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 many talks, over the years with your kids. And using, what we call, just teaching opportunities, when you do see pregnancy or when some weird ad comes on the television, that you might be watching and talking to your, your preteen about what that might mean. So it's taking opportunities to incorporate it into everyday life. That's to me what sex education really is about.
Can you tell us a little bit about the effects of pornography on children?
So, pornography is a really big concerning thing in the sense of that we know that the average age of looking at pornography for children is around about 10 years of age. So it's often not that they're seeking it out, it's just that they're finding it by accident. If you're watching YouTube or just anything on the internet, even though we can have some protections in place, pornography can pop up, very easily. So the impact of pornography on such a young brain, there's a lot of research that's out there that's talking about how damaging that is, because on a few levels, I talk about it from a more emotional, psychological point of view, which is that we are imprinting in young people's brains these images and these sexual acts that aren't real, because we know that pornography is acting, really. When I teach sex ed to teenagers and I talk about it, it's just actors performing, they're just performing sexual acts. And that, there's no intimacy and there's often no protection and there's usually no kissing and there's no consent and all those kind of things. So if our young kids are witnessing these images which they don't understand what's happening, what it forms in them is that's what sex looks like and that's what's normal. So firstly, we have that as a bit of an issue, that we are imprinting in our kids that's what sexuality looks like. It's often very disempowering to women, a lot of the pornography that's out there. So again, we're forming in our young men's brains that I need to dominate a woman, and for the young woman it's all about a man's pleasure, not about hers. So there's just those imprints that we're seeing from the beginning that have a big impact. We also know the brain, of a young person is still forming and they're not capable of being able to process what they're actually seeing, perhaps knowing that it isn't real. And some of those images and stuff they see are actually quite disturbing for them as well, because their brain isn't able to compute what's going on. But because they're watching these images, they also can have feelings that it feels good watching these images, and that can be very confusing for kids as well. So as much as we might be saying it's not good, you can't watch it, there is still a part of them that might feel a little bit excited about watching it, and that gets very, very confusing for kids. So really, we see for young children, the way that I talk to parents about pornography and even teenagers about pornography is that it's not actually going anywhere, unfortunately. It's here to stay. So we need to educate our kids about, that you may see bad images and bad pictures, and you're not going to get in trouble if you see them. Just come and tell me and we'll turn it off, and explaining what it is. It's adults doing grown-up things, having sex, which is not something that children need to see or children need to do, and it can feel upsetting. So you can talk to me about how you feel about that. And so we're firstly not creating any shame around it, but also trying to educate kids that it is there, but it's not really okay for young people to see. So I think we will see more and more and more the impact of pornography as we go on through the research. There's a lot of studies now that talk about, males having, impotence issues because they watch too much pornography. So this is what I talk to my teenagers about when I'm teaching sex ed. One of the big things I like to say to them is porn is not wrong, because a lot of them do watch pornography. It is just one way of how it looks, but let's break it down and understand that it's actually not real. So with the teenagers, I really talk about what do you see when you're watching this? And then we give them the counterbalance of, okay, so what does real intimate relationships look like? It's about consent, it's checking in, it's foreplay, it's, all those kind of things. So we're giving them a different view of what that actually looks like. And then what often alarms the young boys is that if you watch too much porn, what happens into the brain. So the brain, starts to release more and more dopamine, which means that, something that might have been erotic earlier on, doesn't satisfy you anymore. So you need to find more and more extreme things to turn you on or to feel good about. And I was reading a study the other day that, for some young men, by the age of 14, they've watched hundreds of hours of porn before they've even actually held a girl's hand. So then when they get to being with an actual person, holding a hand or kissing, it does nothing for them at all, because their brain has become so hardwired to want this stimulus and this excitement, and just being with a normal person doesn't do anything for them. And that's where we see erectile dysfunction happening with people who have porn addiction. And so then we have to wean them off the porn. So I talk to the teenagers about this, and the boys are sitting there going, holy crap, like this is full on. I'm like, yeah. And then they often ask, well, how much is too much porn? And I'm like, okay, well, that's what we have to figure out for yourself, And I think my thing with sex education, particularly around pornography, is really helping young teens to understand, to not create shame around it, to know that it's really normal to be super curious and want to understand what it's about, but to actually put it in context for them. So we're wanting to offer them other education around how real sexuality and intimacy looks like, as opposed to what that is. Because like anything, if we say don't do it, don't look at it, then of course that's why shouldn't we? So let's go and do it. So I think, look, pornography is a huge issue, and I think that that's why we do need to educate our kids from a young age, because when we imprint in them at a young age, about normal, healthy sexuality, then when they do watch porn, they go, oh, that doesn't feel right for me. That's there, but it's actually not what it's really about. So I think that's why continuous education from a young age makes a really big difference. Look, I also say to parents in my workshops that the imprint on sexuality in your kids is often already done before they're looking at porn. Our children watch us from the moment they're born. They watch how we interact with the world, with ourselves, with our intimate partners. So their foundation of what sexuality is about has already been set, usually, by the time they're starting to ask questions and are interested in it. So part of having healthy sexuality in a home is modelling that. So it's modelling healthy intimacy. It might be gentle touch between you and your partner. It's good care of your body, it's loving your body, all those kind of things. And that's where we imprint what healthy relationships and healthy sexuality look like. That for me is the biggest imprint on our children. And then if we can model that in a really healthy way, then when children are exposed to other stuff, more in the teen years, they always come back to the foundation of what they've been imprinted in. So, it's that same old thing, as a parent, you've got to sort your crap out. Think about the kids you want to raise. So you better start being that. Yeah.
How can we develop age-appropriate ways to educate our kids about sex? Do you have any suggestions for strategies?
Okay. So I think if we're looking at little kids, if we start there, it's, as I was saying, body parts while we're in the bath and, washing your penis or your bottom, all those